Ramaphosa's decision. But according to reports, Ramaphosa is open to more talks with the business community. Let's discuss this now with the chair of the Business for South Africa Steering Committee, Martin Kingston. Thank you so much, Mr. Kingston, for your time and your expertise this evening on Newsnight. So President Cyril Ramaphosa has essentially shifted the debate from should we to we are, but how? Are you willing to take that how forward now that the if has been made a moot point?
Well, good evening, Anneli. We have no choice but to engage substantively with the government and with other key stakeholders. The reality is that the concerns that we and many others had about the implementability of the bill still holds true. We think that it is not viable. We think that it is impractical, in many respects unconstitutional, and most importantly, unimplementable in the quickest possible timeframe to ensure that we can afford universal health care to the population at large, particularly those who need it most desperately. And unfortunately, we think that expectations are being mismanaged in that respect. We've seen much evidence of that over the past couple of weeks. So we have said, and I believe that the presidency has indicated as well, that we need to engage not just business and government, but all relevant stakeholders, all affected parties, to ensure that what has been signed into law is rendered fit for purpose as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
So markets showed a knee-jerk reaction with Discovery shares down a few percent, but rebounding the very next day. What's been the overall reaction from business, from your colleagues and the people that you've been speaking to?
Well, I think we were all hopeful that the reservations that we had, that the inputs that we provided would be taken into consideration. By the way, not a single input was taken into consideration. The legislation that was signed by the president was the same legislation that had served effectively in front of Parliament, both the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, despite literally not hundreds but thousands of inputs that have been given by all segments of society. So that is disappointing. I think it's also got to be recognized that this is a phased approach. The president has said as much himself in the last 24 hours. We were of the view that we should actually articulate an overall construct that was viable and implementable, that would not alienate, but would actually draw all stakeholders into the process. The private sector in all of its shapes, sizes and forms, not just large businesses, but private practitioners, as well as obviously clinics, pharmacists and the like, have a very significant role to play. We've demonstrated over the past 4 years the benefits of partnering with government and supporting it in its initiative, and that's what we have to do here. But we need to do so in such a manner that it doesn't alienate key providers of healthcare and indeed key consumers of healthcare, such as the workforce who currently benefit, for example, from private healthcare, all with the intention, as I indicated previously, of ensuring that we can achieve the objective of universal primary health care for the population as large, as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
So not implementable in its current form. I think there has been recognition from all sides that there's much work to be done to get this bill to a point where we can start implementing. However, the general consensus seems to be that there is still a long time before we can start doing that. So where do you think the fine-tuning needs to start?
Well, I think it's unfortunately more than fine-tuning. It's only a limited number of, we believe, adjustments to the legislation as signed by the president that needs to take place, but they are very material. We need to ensure that there's an acknowledged role for the private sector in the form of schemes to play, to leverage off what they are already doing. We need to ensure that the contracting arrangements for both private hospitals, for example, but individuals are clear, withstand scrutiny, that we understand what the pricing procedures are. We need to be comfortable that there's an institutional framework appropriately capacitated with the right quality of executive and board, independent, but with the requisite skills and capabilities that can oversee this process. We know from bitter experience as a country how difficult it is to establish these institutions from scratch. And in the interim, while we're looking at that, and as I said, even the government is looking at a phased approach. We're going to have to manage expectations very aggressively. More importantly, that we see that there are certain specific provisions. For example, we know that even by the government's own estimates of some 10 years ago, there was an incremental 200 billion rand a year that needed to be raised to actually ensure the viability of this. We think it's considerably more than that. We don't think that that can come from taxes. We think that the tax base is already a small and diminishing tax base. And the more we tax, the less tax we'll actually receive. It's the so-called Laffer curve. It's a disincentive for people to work, to pay taxes if they pay away more, not just individuals, but of course institutions. So we need to look at the funding proposals. The funding proposals and indeed the levying of taxes doesn't sit with anybody other than the Minister of Finance in a money bill. We'll look with interest at what the Minister of Finance discusses in his forthcoming budget, indeed the medium-term, short-term budget at the end of this year. But more importantly, we think we need to have a holistic approach that considers all of the relevant stakeholders. What we don't want to do as a country, and we know that there are many people threatening it, is to engage in litigation. If we engage in litigation, we'll have gridlock and nothing will proceed for the foreseeable future. That's the worst possible outcome. The best one is to ensure that we take all of those views into consideration. We make such adjustments as are necessary, as I said, to render it fit for purpose for all stakeholders, whether they be employees, whether they be, as I said, private medical practitioners, whether they be funds or indeed private hospitals, the whole gamut, pharmaceutical companies and the like, and ensure that we bring them into the equation as quickly and as efficiently as possible to work alongside government in achieving its objectives.
Prior to the signing of the bill, and possibly still, there were fears that those working in the healthcare sector and those thinking of investing in the healthcare sector in South Africa would look at alternatives. Do you think those fears are realistic or more probable now that the NHI bill has been signed? And what would be your caution to those individuals and businesses?
Until we've got a clear pathway, a so-called route map, a critical path as to how we're going to get from where we are to implementation. And when I say implementation, I say full implementation. It is absolutely realistic to assume that companies will be cautious about investing because they don't know what the environment is into which they will be investing. They have no security or confidence as to the returns that they will earn, the business model that they can implement. The same goes, of course, for individuals. If individuals are not certain about the nature of their employment, the status of it, the contracting arrangements that apply to it, they may well look for alternative options either within the country or outside. Those are the, again, worst outcomes that we can expect in a country where those skills are absolutely essential, where we want to crowd in all of the capabilities that exist, whether they be in the public or the private sector, at an individual and institutional level, and we need to provide the requisite reassurance that they will be accommodated, that they will be incorporated, and that we'll have a fair, equitable and transparent approach to ensuring that we have universal healthcare coverage.
Those fears being as they are, do you see the indication from the presidency that further engagements are forthcoming as an indication that the business sector primarily will be drawn into those discussions despite your input having not been worked into the NHI bill in its current form?
Yes. So, of course, first of all, I need to say it's not just the input from business, large or small. It's the input from anybody. None of the inputs that were provided were taken into consideration. So obviously we need to reassess that. When I say we as a country need to reassess that. I'm confident that the President and the Presidency, as I indicated, has already said so, is open to engagement, particularly during the first phase. They've allocated some 3 years for the first phase to get this up and running. Unfortunately, simply because the legislation has been signed into law doesn't mean that the circumstances change for individuals on the ground between yesterday and today. We've got a long runway, and we need to use that time judiciously and thoughtfully to make sure that we can corral all of business, all of the private sector more broadly, and indeed society at large, to ensure, as I said, that we render the legislation that's been signed into law fit for purpose as quickly as possible.
Well, thank you for speaking to us, for your time and your insights. That was Martin Kingston from Business for South Africa. Now, Eskom chairperson Mteto Nyati